In this video, we shall understand the need for modulation. As we already know, what is modulation? Modulation is a process of changing the characteristics of the carrier wave. I mean, if I have a carrier wave like this, okay, high frequency carrier wave like this, so changing the characteristics of the carrier wave, okay, what are the characteristics? Amplitude or the frequency. So such characteristics of the carrier wave are changed according to the instantaneous values of the modulating signal. This can be a modulating signal. According to the instantaneous values of the modulating signal, the characteristics of the carrier wave are changed. Such a changing process is what we call it as modulation. That is what we know already, right. So now we shall understand why the modulation is required, where and all the modulation is being used, utilized. That is what we are going to understand now. Simple, why the modulation is used. First point we are going to discuss, for long distance communication. For long distance communication, by just observing this picture, you people can understand that here, for long distance communication, the modulation is used. Why the modulation is used for long distance communications? To answer this question, I would say that for transmitting the baseband signals over longer distance, for transmitting the baseband signals over the longer distance, the modulation is necessary. The modulation is necessary. Okay. Why the modulation is necessary to transmit the baseband signals over long distance? In the sense, the baseband signals will not have higher energy. The baseband signals will not have higher energy. When the baseband signals do not have the higher energy, they cannot travel over longer distance. To make these baseband signals gain little amount of energy, that is sufficient for traveling from source to destination, what we do? We do modulation. What we do? We do modulation. Modulation in the sense that is what we are going to use a high frequency carrier wave, which is going to have high amount of energy and which can carry the signals from one place to another place without any greater disturbance. So that is why to transmit the baseband signals over longer distance, we need modulation. Modulation is very necessary. You can observe, to transmit the signals over longer distance, we make use of modulation. What do you mean by modulation? Modulation is a process of changing the characteristics of the carrier wave according to the instantaneous values of the modulating signal. The second point that we are going to discuss here is we can make use of this point, like we can understand this point like this. So ease of radiation. Okay, why it is called as ease of radiation? Because when modulation is done in higher frequency, it reduces the efforts that is put in designing the antenna. How, sir? Because antenna dimensions of an antenna, are depending on the multiples of wavelength. What they are? They are the multiples of wavelength. I mean, the antenna dimensions are the multiples of wavelength. Okay. The antenna dimensions are the multiples of wavelength. Hence, when modulation is done in higher frequency, it reduces the length of antenna or dimensions. Okay, dimensions of antenna is reduced. Okay, when we make use of modulation. Okay, so that is why modulation becomes very important point over there. Further, for multiplexing, what do you mean by multiplexing? Multiplexing is, in simple words, if I want to say, I can say that multiplexing is sending number of signals. Just observe this picture. Okay, so sending number of signals, a signal 1, signal 2, signal 3 over a single communication channel. Okay, sending number of signals, signals 1, signal 2 and signal 3 over a single communication channel is what I call it as multiplexing. So how does this modulation help multiplexing? In the sense, if I do not have different carrier frequencies for if I do not use different carrier frequencies for signal 1, signal 2 and signal 3, C1, C2, C3 are carrier signal 1, carrier signal 2, carrier signal 3. If I do not use these carrier signals and mix all these 3 signals together and try to send it through the communication channel, they will interfere. To avoid this interference between the signals that are sent from one signal to another signal through the single communication channel, we modulate them with the respective carrier signals, carrier signal 1 and carrier signal 2 and carrier signal 3. Okay. So, C3 or carrier signal 3. So, by making such changes or by making such modulation with the different carrier signals, what happens? So, the 1 is modulated for a different carrier signal, 2 is modulated for a different carrier signal, 3 is modulated for a different carrier signal. Then we can add all these modulated signals, together, okay, and make it a composite signal, and that composite signal can be transmitted from multiplexer to demultiplexer or source to destination. Okay. During this process, okay, we require modulation. And then we go to the next point below here. Okay. So, what is here? For frequency assignment. What do you mean by the frequency assignment? I will give you an example. I have a very good example for this. Okay. So, let me go down here. Okay. For frequency assignment, most of you people are very well known with how that radio communication works, right? So, each and every radio communication channel or each and every radio channel, for example, your some of the favorites are like 98.3 Red FM and 92.1 Big FM. So, 104.2 Fever, Radio Fever. These are the different channels that are available in Bangalore, for instance. Okay, you can understand, just it gives you a brief idea. Okay, these are the different channels that you people do have. You can just observe 98.3 is the frequency that is assigned for channel 1, 104.2 is the frequency that is assigned for channel 2 and 92.1 is the frequency that is assigned for channel 3. Just understand, if I do not modulate these 3 signals, I have 3 signals, right, 3 channels, right. So, each channel will be carrying one signal, right. Okay. If I do not modulate these 3 signals, signal 1 and signal 2 and signal 3, when I make them to travel through or when I make them to transmit through a longer distance in the single communication channel, okay, if I say this is a communication channel and I make them to transfer or travel through the single communication channel, they will get interfered. What do you mean by interference? They hit one another and they lose the energy and they lose the information. To avoid such problem, what we do? We do modulation. I have signal 1, I have signal 2, I have signal 3. Each signal is modulated to carrier 1, carrier 2 and carrier 3 respective different carrier signals. After this modulation, will get modulated signal 1, modulated signal 2 and modulated signal 3. Okay. So, these modulated signals will not interfere together when they are added and transmitted through a single communication channel. When they are added and transmitted through a single communication channel, they do not interfere. So, such a wonderful thing can be done by using modulation. Okay. So, that is why what I say, frequency assignment, assigning a frequency for each different channel can be done by using frequency assignment. The frequency assignment can be successfully done by using modulation. That is how the modulation helps in frequency assignment. Next we go to for reducing noise and interference. If I have a modulated signal, and you can just see what is the difference between noise signal and information signal. So, this red signal, sine wave, whatever that you people are able to observe, is what I call it as information signal, and this disturbance whatever that we are able to observe now, this disturbance is what I call it as noise signal. Whichever the signal that is not required is what we generally call it as noise signal. To avoid the effect of noise signal, we need to protect this information signal. If we do not protect this information signal, that information signal will be definitely affected by noise and interference. To avoid that effect of noise and interference, we make use of modulation. What we make use of? We make use of modulation. Okay. So, we make use of modulation. So, by using modulation, we can reduce the effect of noise, we can reduce the effect of noise on the information signal, we can reduce the effect of noise on the information signal. So, that is why he says for reducing the noise and interference, the modulation is required. Okay. Then we go to understand one more simple important point in the next slide, okay, where we do have here. Okay. So, what he says, to overcome the equipment limitation, we make use of modulation. In most of the applications, okay, you can just observe here, in most of the applications, frequency range of the processing equipment and the signals does not match. Okay. The frequency of the equipment, if I have an equipment E and the frequency on which this equipment works is f1, and the frequency that I have as a signal is f2, and as the frequency is different, the equipment will not function properly for the frequency 2. To change the frequency from f2 to f1, what I should make use of? I should make use of f1 as the carrier frequency. F1 should become the carrier frequency and f2 should become the modulating signal. What signal? Modulating signal. So, when this becomes modulating signal, f2 becomes modulating signal and f1 becomes the carrier signal, this modulating signal's impression is been put onto the frequency f1, and wherein the frequency f1 can work very well with my equipment, such a way to avoid or to eradicate the equipment limitations, we make use of modulation. In most of the applications, that is what he says, in most of the applications, the frequency range, okay, the frequency range of the processing equipment and the signals does not match. Then what we should do? Then the equipment frequency is fixed and the signal frequency is changed. Equipment frequency was f1, signal frequency was f2. What we have done, we have changed the signal frequency and we have modulated to the equipment frequency. By that way, we can overcome the equipment limitations. These are the basics of, or these are the points that includes the need of modulation, why we require the modulation. Thank you.